Matthias Krebs was a simple man who raised sheep and loved a woman named Priscilla. He built his own home with his own hands, grew his own crops, and honored his wife each and every day with all the love he had in his heart. He lived a life of great happiness. Priscilla, on the other hand, did not. She had nothing for herself. Everything was controlled by her overbearing husband. He did not let her have friends because he wanted her all to himself. He would not let her cook or clean because he did not want her perfect skin to become hard with work. She sat in the house all day, miserable. She had no purpose or reason to be anything but her husband's possession. She was suffocated in his constant need for her love and affection. One day, the milkman came to deliver milk given by the cows of a neighboring farm. Priscilla was immediately smitten and begged him to take her away from her present life. She began sneaking away to see him while Matthias worked his fingers to the bone in the fields for hours. One particularly hot Wednesday afternoon, Matthias came into the house to get a glass of water. He usually brought a few jars with him, but he was dehydrated and had used them all up. Priscilla was nowhere to be found. He panicked and ran to the neighboring farm. The people that lived there tried to stop him from entering, but they were no match for a terrified man in love. He pushed through them to the bedroom where the sounds of agony were coming from. But those were not sounds of agony. They were unfamiliar to him because he had not been a good enough lover to inspire them to come from her lips. He burst through the door to save his wife from the torture she was certainly enduring, only to find Priscilla on top of the milkman. Her eyes rolled back in her head and she screamed with delight. He grabbed her by the neck and dragged her from the house without a word. He locked her in the bedroom and boarded up the windows so she couldn't escape. Months went by, one day the same as the next. After bringing her Christmas Eve dinner, he crept back to the neighbor's house and hung a dead bird from his prized pear tree. The milkman, of course, knew immediately who had done this to him, but knew he was wrong to sleep with another man's wife, even under the circumstances, and did not retaliate. The next Christmas Eve, Matthias left 2 mutilated turtle doves on the milkman's porch, but this time the milkman retaliated with 3 headless French hens laid end to end on Matthias's own porch. For a long year, Matthias plotted and could not come to a conclusion on what to leave the man who had spoiled his most prized possession. At the last moment, he saw a group of cully birds near his vegetables. He crept up and smashed a few of them with a chunk of wood. He gathered them into a burlap sack and left them, several nights later, on the man's porch, rotted and smelling vile. The milkman retaliated by slaughtering his sheep and leaving 5 sets of golden eyes on Matthias's porch. Matthias was outraged. He cut the heads off 6 of the milkman's geese and laid them out in a circle. Their eyes pointed to the milkman's door so he would see their accusing faces saying, "You did this to us." The milkman was so angered he slaughtered another of his geese, cut the head off, dressed them all as swans, and placed them playfully on Matthias's porch the next night. Matthias was out of his mind. He thought for sure it would stop with the geese. He couldn't have imagined the man would turn his brilliance into sarcasm. He waited until the next Christmas Eve without a word to anyone. He crept into the milkman's house in the middle of the night and put a cloth of ether over the man's mouth. Once the man was in a deep sleep, he bound his wife and 7 daughters to the milkman's cow's udders, fists clenching their teeth. 2 days later, Matthias woke to the sound of his house being surrounded by giant bombs as the milkman and his family, who were now part of this by his own hand, set up an array of 9 explosives in his front yard and triggered them in succession, driving Matthias into a rage. Not being one to concede easily, Matthias spent weeks sneaking over at night and digging holes in their yard and disguising them until he had all 10 ready to go. He carved pipettes out of the trees on his own property and set them in the milkman's yard the night the big storm was coming. He braved high winds and dust to get his newest diabolical contraption together. As the storm winds whipped through the pipettes, a shrill noise surrounded the milkman's house, driving everyone crazy. The storm was far too strong to venture outside, and they sat for hours trapped in the high-pitched, deafening roar. Matthias, on the other hand, was back safely under his warm covers, arm around his wife, who was chained to the bed. Now the milkman and his entire family had had enough. They told some friends about what had been going on, and they all decided it was time to end this. The 11 of them snuck down to Matthias's property, and the daughters and friends snuck around back while the milkman distracted Matthias with a fake apology and some discussion. They freed Priscilla from her hell and got her back to their home as they made arrangements to get her out of town and away from Matthias for good. The milkman knew this would be the ultimate revenge for terrorizing them. When Matthias figured out what happened to him hours later after a long day in the field, he went insane. He destroyed nearly everything inside his home and then headed to the constable. While leaving out a lot of details, he convinced the constable to grab up his 10 deputies, and they all marched down to the milkman's house to end this once and for all. They leapt in through the glass windows and subdued everyone in the house as Matthias made his way to the master bedroom where he was sure to find Priscilla. And he did, with a shotgun pointed right between his eyes. Matthias was in shock and demanded she come home with him. She refused over and over. He finally had enough and moved forward to grab her. He instantly felt a sting and then nothing more as the bullet separated his head, splattering blood across the walls. His body fell to the ground, and she was finally free. The story became one of legend, and a song was written summing up the events. Children, however, were not allowed to hear such tales, and the song was rewritten to be one of a holiday celebration involving a ridiculous amount of birds.